Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Lori Cohen. I am the Director of Continuing Education at Gratz College. Thank you for joining us tonight for the webinar, Mavens, Jewish Advice Givers, with Gratz College Continuing Education Instructor, Dr. Steve Chervin. Before we get to the program, I want to mention that our next webinar is on Tuesday, May 19th from 7:30 till 8:30 p.m. In next week's webinar, Gratz College Board Chair, Rabbi Lance Sussman, PhD, will discuss the Philadelphia Jewish community during the Yellow Fever of 1793. So check the events page on our website for more details. You'll find it under the Community tab. I want to remind everyone that Gratz's summer continuing education schedule is now posted on our website. And if you enjoyed Dr. Chervin's presentation tonight, be sure to take a look at his Tevye class that's coming up starting on Monday, June 22nd. That class runs for 4 mornings from 10 to 12 that week. Great news, we have, 160 people who are logged in right now for this presentation. We had over 300 who registered. Now, due to the size of the group, we are muting all of your audio and all of your video. You'll be able to see and hear the speaker, but no one can see or hear you. Now, today's format will be a little bit different than some of our past webinars, if you've seen any of them, in that tonight it will be a little bit more interactive. So get ready to use your chat function today. During the presentation, Dr. Chervin will ask you questions. Stay alert. You will need the chat function. This can be found in different locations of your screen, depending on the type of media you're using. On desktop computers or laptops, it can be found at the bottom of your screen. On tablets, it's often at the top of the screen. On cell phones, you may have to swipe left or right. Now, he's going to ask you questions and you're going to put in your answers. I will select 1 or maybe 2 of the answers depending on our time and read it to the group. So definitely interactive tonight. We're recording this session right now. I will send you a link to the recording after it has been processed and edited. You'll also receive an online survey soon after the presentation ends. We appreciate your input as it helps us improve your experience for future webinars. You'll also have an opportunity to sign up for next week's webinar. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Chervin to begin our lesson for today. He teaches a variety of Jewish education courses for the continuing education program at Gratz. And he's also currently the Director of Docent Training at the National Museum of American Jewish History. So welcome, Dr. Chervin.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be here. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate that. And it's a beautiful day here in Philadelphia. The sun is shining. I don't know if any of you have looked out the window or not, but it is a beautiful day. Lori, I just want to make sure for people who are inside, they don't need to wear a mask, do they?
I don't think so. I think you're pretty good when you're inside. Yeah, I would say so.
I just wanted to make sure that we're following Gratz College protocol. Now, this evening's presentation is entitled Mavens, Jewish Experts and Advice Givers, and I have to confess that I am not a maven when it comes to PowerPoint. I am not a maven when it comes to Zoom. But I do have some mavens who have been helping me out. So Lori and David at Gratz College have been helping me with Zoom and PowerPoint. And my wife Doreen has been a major asset to me in terms of learning PowerPoint as well. So this is a group effort here, and I do appreciate all of the assistance. It's wonderful to have friends and former students and current students from all over the country who are joining us. And I want to say right at the outset that I know that there are many mavens out there among you. I know that many of you think of yourselves as mavens, and that's really wonderful. But I do have to apologize that I won't be able to acknowledge each and every one of you in the presentation this evening. There's just a limited amount of time. So I've selected a couple of mavens that I want to focus in on. And if I've skipped over you, please don't take it personally. So I have a PowerPoint presentation and we're going to see how that works. I'm going to share my screen and let's see how this goes. Okay, move this to the side here and this over here. And put this set up, and we will go to presenter view. And the screen goes black, but then it should come back up. It should come back up. And hopefully now you can all see the first slide. Lori, can you see the first slide?
You know, Steve, where the slide looks like it's cut off a little bit. So I think there was a slightly different format that we must have shown. And now we're seeing, yep, we can see that, and we can see the next slide and any notes that you might have.
Okay. All right. So we're ready to go with this. Okay. So this is entitled Mavens, Jewish Experts and Advice Givers. And you know, the last class that I taught for Gratz College earlier in the winter was on the subject of anti-Semitism. And I thought that given the current conditions of our lives and in the world today, it would be more fun to do something of a lighter nature. So that's what gave rise to thinking about this topic, which I have taught previously. And so I hope that it's enjoyable and entertaining for everybody for this evening. So I have 4 objectives for tonight in terms of the presentation. And the first one is to learn about the Mavens themselves. Who are they? Where do they come from? Who are these people who sort of set themselves up as experts and advice givers? What are their backgrounds and qualifications? What were the major influences in their lives? What are their biases? What are their personal values? And what types of media do they use? So these are questions that will guide us through each of the Mavens that we look at. The second objective is to learn about the letter writers, the audience. Who are they? What are their ages, genders, ethnic and religious backgrounds? Are they Jews? Are they non-Jews? What kinds of questions do they ask? What are their primary concerns? So these are issues that we'll touch upon. And then the third objective is to learn more specifically about the nature of the answers and the advice that they gave. How do the Mavens answer the writer's concerns? What roles do Jewish tradition and Jewish values play in the advice given by these Mavens? And here's where the interactive participatory part comes in. I will ask and invite you to think about how you would answer some of the letter writers' questions, okay? We'll also be looking at the Mavens, the tone of the answers that they give and the kinds of advice that the Mavens are providing, okay? And then the last objective is to look overall together at how these Mavens and the letter writers and the answers and the advice and the media all have changed over time. We're going to start in the early 20th century and bring it right up to today. So where we start is back in the early 20th century with a bunch of letters that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the so-called Bintel Brief, an outstanding treasure of lore and literature that really gives us an incredible peek into the lives of the immigrant Jews who came from Eastern Europe in the late 19th and early 20th century, most of them settling in New York on the Lower East Side, some moving on to other parts of the country, and really unburdening themselves and seeking help from the editor, in particular, of this newspaper. So here we have the name of it, and here actually is the title from this section, which is of course in Yiddish, and it says a Bintel Brief. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Is that better? Okay. That better, Lori?
Yes, it actually looks much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, with a little help from my wife on that. Okay.
Hey, that's great. In-house tech support works for me.
Okay, very good, very good. Okay, so a Bintel Brief, and this so this allows us to see what this section looked like back in the days, and I'm actually okay. We're going to go so. Now we're going to go to what this, this all appeared in the newspaper known as the Forward. And the Forward started publishing in 1897. So it was founded in New York City. And among the founders was a man by the name of Abraham Kahan. And he had come from Eastern Europe himself and had landed first in Philadelphia and then on the Lower East Side, which is where he spent the rest of his life. And he helped to name this paper the Forward, or the Forverts, as it says, and you can see here on the slide, Vorwärts, which is actually not a Yiddish word, but a German word. And this is named after a socialist newspaper that appeared in Germany. And so that name was absorbed and taken over by this newspaper here in New York. Here we see a picture of Abraham Kahan and a little bit about his background, that he was born in near Vilna in 1860, arrived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in 1892. And then in 1897 is when he founded the Forverts. He served as its founding editor on and off until, say, 1946 or so, when he had a stroke, but he remained involved with the paper, and then ultimately he died in 1951 in New York City. But certainly for all of that time period, Abraham Kahan was considered the guiding force in the newspaper, number one, and number two, in the Bintel Brief itself. So how did that come about? People were writing letters in to the newspaper and on various different topics. And then starting around 1906, there were several letters that came in to the paper that were of a different nature. They were much more personal. These were questions about how the individuals should resolve personal problems in their own lives, having to do with their family or their work or their religious beliefs, etc. And it was in response to that that Kahan decided he was going to add an advice column to the newspaper, and it would be called the Bintel Brief, which means a bundle of letters. And it became as I said, a central repository and location for so many of the Eastern European Jews to pour out their hearts and to unburden themselves and to seek advice and help with the various dilemmas that they faced. Now, Kahan himself and the Forverts and the editorial board had certain values that they brought to the table, and certainly among them were the values of advocacy for workers, for labor rights, for socialism, for labor unions. They were active supporters of the labor movement and the various unions, labor unions, which were started, many by Jews and many at this point in history, in the early 20th century in New York. Another major theme and thrust of their work was to help the greenhorns, the newly arriving Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, about how to assimilate to American culture. People just didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how to transition to an entirely different world whose values and whose rules and whose norms were radically different from the shtetls that most of them had left in the Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe. Beyond that, Kahan was very interested in human interest, just what was going on in people's lives. And he responded and actually answered most of the letters himself in the early years that the column appeared. Later on, he built up a staff and had a number of people who helped him in writing the responses. But at first, he took it as his own personal task and job to address the various different issues that people were raising. We can see here a little bit about the background of the letter writers and where they came from. So we have a map here of the Pale of Settlement from 1835 to 1917. These are the various different areas or provinces that existed, essentially what had been the border between Russia on the one hand in the east and Poland on the left, on the west, and all of these areas into which there were some 5 to 6 million Jews by the late 19th century who lived in these areas. Among them places like Kovno and Vilna and Grodno, Minsk, Volhynia. My family came from the area around Kiev, Bessarabia. And so I'm sure many of these areas are familiar to you because it may be that your own ancestors, grandparents, and great-grandparents came from these very places. So these were the recent immigrants, and between this time period of when the Pale began to empty out in the year 1881 after the assassination of the Tsar, and until the doors of immigration to this country were largely slammed shut to people from Eastern Europe, some well over 2.5 million European Jews immigrated to the United States. The vast majority of them entered this country through Ellis Island in New York Harbor, and a large percentage of those then moved from Ellis Island to the Lower East Side, and then after some time there, then moved to the outer suburbs, meaning Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx and other places of New York City, and then other places across the country. So these were the people that made up the population that was reading the Bintel Brief, and certainly Jews across the country were reading the Bintel Brief and the Forverts. Here we see two scenes of what life looked like on the Lower East Side at that time. You've got lots of push carts, lots of crowds, it's very packed, and at one time, this area, this neighborhood in Manhattan had the highest population density in the world. People were packed in like sardines, and any of you who may have visited the Tenement Museum in Manhattan has seen a recreation of that, and if you've taken any of the walking tours of that neighborhood, you've developed some familiarity with what that area looked like, or looks like today, but with some intimations of what life was like with literally hundreds, over 100 people living in let's say a 3-story walk-up apartment or tenement, and people exchanging and sharing beds, taking shifts in bed, and eating and working and studying and carrying on all the activities of their lives in a very limited area and space. So we can imagine the incredible number of personal and social problems that proliferated in addition to the economic and the health issues and a whole range of other challenges that faced people at this time, and they needed help. And whereas historically, many of these people, when they were back in the Pale of Settlement, when they had a problem or an issue, might very well have gone to their rabbi and asked their rabbi for advice. More typically, those situations, those questions may have had a lot to do with ritual or questions of kashrut or Shabbat observance, other elements of Jewish observance, but also family dynamics, family relationships, and friendships and business and other kinds of things. Well, when they came to New York and they came to America, the rabbis who had been the experts and the mavens and the advice givers back in the old country were at much of a loss, if not more so, than the rest of their flock, the rest of the Jews who came here. In fact, it was the Jews who had some economic savvy, and they had developed certain kinds of skills like tailoring or other kinds of crafts or activities, occupations in the old country. And in some cases, they were able to apply and transfer those skills to their lives here in the United States. Rabbis were pretty much at a loss since there was not a great need at that time for that kind of help. That was not the first or primary concern of the immigrants who came. So here we have a picture of Abraham Kahn, another one, and we see obviously what he's doing is he's going through the sack of letters. Here's the Bintel Brief, literally. And he read through them and wrote responses to them. The letters were written to the forward in Yiddish, and he and his editorial staff responded to the letters in Yiddish. In some cases, people who wanted to write letters were not even capable. They were not literate themselves and couldn't write a letter in Yiddish. And so there was a small industry or profession of people who actually would write the letters for some people. And here's just a very small sampling of a couple of the letters that came in to just give us a little bit of a taste and a flavor as to what the concerns were that were being raised. So, I'm a socialist and would like to know if you think it is all right going with an American girl. She wants to go to dances and balls and affairs, and I would like to know if you think it is all right for me to go too. So here we have the dynamic, and there were lots of these kinds of conflicts between a socialist ideologue and man, and an American girl who is much more interested in social activities and more recreational activities, let's say, as opposed to political or revolutionary ideals. So that was clearly one of the points of tension and conflict. Here's another one. Is it a sin to use face powder? Shouldn't a girl look beautiful? My father does not want me to use face powder. Is it a sin? We can look at a simple letter like this and we can see, you know, a generational divide. We can see issues related to, again, socialization, meeting other people, as opposed to, and certainly modernity as a major challenge to tradition. In the old country, you know, girls wouldn't necessarily think about using face powder or dressing up in certain ways. But America presented an entirely different environment, and it was those kinds of challenges and dilemmas that the new immigrants were struggling and wrestling with in very deep ways, in very distressing challenges, and they needed somebody who had a bit more experience and wisdom and can help them sort through some of these challenges. Here we have a letter. This is one of my favorites that comes from the Bintel Brief. And I'll ask you to follow along closely with this one, since I'll be asking you to think of your own answer. And actually, when we go to the chat box, and I will invite you when I finish reading the letter, is for you to answer in either one of two ways. On the one hand, if you'd like to answer in terms of the advice that you would give or the way that you personally would respond to this letter writer, and just simply write me, M-E, colon, and then write your answer. If you would prefer to speculate on the answer that you think the editors of the forward, that Abraham Kahan, the answer that he might have given, then just write BB for Bintel Brief, okay? I hope everybody understands those instructions. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Here's the letter. Dear editor, I ask you to give me some advice in my situation. I'm a young man of 25, 16 years in America, and I recently met a fine girl. She has a flaw, however, that keeps me from marrying her. The fault is that she has a dimple in her chin, and it is said that people who have this lose their first husband or wife. Well, at first I laughed at the idea, but later it began to bother me. I began to observe people with dimpled chins, and I found out that first husbands or wives really had died prematurely. I got so interested in this that whenever I see someone with this defect, I ask about it immediately. And I found out that some of the men have lost wives, and some of the women's first husbands are dead. This upset me so much that I don't know what to do. I can't leave my sweetheart. I love her very much, but I'm afraid to marry her lest I die because of the dimple. I've questioned many people. Some say it's true. Others laugh at the idea. Perhaps you too will laugh at me for being such a fool and believing such nonsense. But I cannot rest until I hear your opinion about it. I want to add that my sweetheart knows nothing about this. Respectfully, the unhappy fool. So the chat box is open, and I invite you to submit your answers. And while you're doing that, just a couple of things to note. One thing is just how much trust and how much power the letter writers and how much faith they put in Abraham Kahan and in the editors of the forwards. And this is very common to say, I cannot rest until I hear your opinion about it. This phrase, this line appears in many of the letters. And it's very clear that so many of the letter writers really turned to Abraham Kahan and again, his staff as incredible ultimate authorities. And unquestionably, the advice that they gave them, people tended to follow, okay? So Lori, do we have some answers in the chat box for you to share?
We do. I feel like the operator that is standing by right now.
Okay, great.
Okay. So
Go for it.
we have several answers here, and they continue to come in. Robbie says that the answer coming from, I believe that's a woman, that Robbie says, this is how wives' tales get started. But first, you have to make her a wife. Okay. Then we have
Okay.
from Carol says, it comes from Hebrew, leaving to understand and know. Maven and expert. I'm not sure I read that right. I apologize. Here's one from Rose, who says the Bintel Brief would say, this is superstition and we live in modern times now. Someone else, Michael, says her first husband died, so he's in the clear. Laurie says, I would advise him to follow his heart. Randy says, there's nothing in the Torah or Talmud that would give you reason to abandon love for someone who is dear to you.
Okay.
We have Wendy, who says, I would agree with Rose's words. And I don't know how far you want me to go.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good.
So many messages here.
Yeah, that's a nice sampling. Okay, I think we could start our own newspaper here.
I do want to check the mirror to see if I have a dimple, though. Now you've got me.
Okay. All right. So those are great answers. Let's find out what Abe Khan said. So here's the answer that he gave. The tragedy is not that the girl has a dimple in the chin, but that some people have a screw loose in their heads. One would need the knowledge of a genius to explain how a dimple in the chin could drive a husband or a wife to the grave. Does the angel of death sit hiding in the dimple? It seems to us that it is a beauty spot, and we never imagined it could house the devil. It's tragic humor to find such superstition in the world today. It's truly shameful that a young man who was brought up in America should ask such questions. To calm him, we wish to tell him we know many people with dimples who have not lost their first husbands or wives, but live out their years together in great happiness. And here we see a famous Jewish American with a very famous dimple, who lived, obviously, to be very old. Just recently passed away. So I think that one of our audience members noted that Abe Khan would sort of condemn this kind of thinking as being superstitious, and really this kind of a bubamisa, this kind of a superstition was better left in the old country. But here in America, we're modern, we're rational, we're logical, and we leave behind all of that kind of thinking where it belongs, back in the old country. Very good. Here's a letter that was written in 1910, and of a more serious nature. Dear editor, since I do not want my conscience to bother me, I ask you to decide whether a married woman has the right to go to school 2 evenings a week. My husband thinks I have no right to do this. I admit that I cannot be satisfied to be just a wife and a mother. I am still young, and I want to learn and enjoy life. My children and my house are not neglected, but I go to evening high school twice a week. My husband is not pleased, and when I come home at night and ring the bell, he lets me stand outside a long time intentionally and doesn't hurry to open the door. Now he has announced a new decision. Because I send out the laundry to be done, it seems to him that I have too much time for myself, even enough to go to school. So from now on, he will count every penny for anything I have to buy for the house. So I will not be able to send out the laundry anymore. And when I have to do work myself, there won't be any time left for such, quote, foolishness as going to school. I told him that I'm willing to do my own washing, but that I would still be able to find time to study. When I'm alone with my thoughts, I feel I may not be right. Perhaps I should not go to school. And listen, let's see, I should not go to school. I want to say that my husband is an intelligent man, and he wanted to marry a woman who is educated. The fact that he is intelligent makes me more annoyed with him. He is in favor of the emancipation of women, yet in real life, he acts contrary to his beliefs. Awaiting your opinion on this, I remain, your reader, the discontented wife. So I'll let you all turn to your chat box and sharpen your pens and pencils. And again, respond with BB if you want to speculate on how the Bintel Brief editors responded to this letter, or just write ME for your own personal opinion. Certainly, this kind of a challenge and this kind of a dilemma about women's roles and women's rights in the family was a major challenge in the New World. We certainly know that there were many young women, young single women, who worked in the garment trade. But married women tended to stay more at home as housewives and focus more on raising children, cooking, cleaning, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a real dilemma, and ultimately, women like this, went on strike. They fought. These were the women who ultimately created the women's liberation movement in many ways in this country. Lori, do we have some responses to this letter?
Oh, we sure do.
Okay, great.
They're
Thank
coming
you.
in so fast, I can't even read this fast.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with some people who tried to answer from the Bintel Brief.
Okay.
And that is, one person, Anne, says, an educated woman will raise educated children.
Uh-huh.
I have Robbie, who says that's the way men were brought up. Here I have to try to, this is moving so quickly, so many messages are coming in. Roberta says from her, your husband is feeling threatened by you getting an education. Try to explain to him how the education will help you educate your children and help you become Americanized, in quotes. I think one person said, make sure you get the key to the house. I thought, what was the other one? Maxine says he sounds like a control freak who's afraid his wife will be more intelligent than he is. It's also an indication of power. One from the Bintel Brief says, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Follow your own mind and remind your husband that this is what he had wanted. And tell him it was get your own key, then you won't have to wait and you'll have more time to do the laundry.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Lori, and thank you all. So, here we see he's a man, who's in favor of the emancipation of women, but obviously he's a hypocrite when it comes to his own home life. It's very different. Now, today in the year 2020, this may not be such an issue anymore. Certainly, this situation has changed dramatically. But 100, 110, 120 years ago, this was a critical issue, and it's hard maybe for us to relate to it and to understand and identify it, but it was not that long ago that roles and responsibilities and expectations were radically different from what they are today. And certainly women can rightly claim, look how far we've come. And certainly men as well as women can say, look how far we've come in terms of equality and equal rights, which are positive values for society as a whole. Let's see how the editors answered this one. Since this man is intelligent and an adherent of the women's emancipation movement, he is scolded severely in the answer for wanting to keep his wife so enslaved. Also, the opinion is expressed that the wife absolutely has the right to go to school 2 evenings a week. So the Bintel Brief, the editors, the forward, Kahan, were very much in favor of women's rights. They were very much in favor of equal rights. They saw this as part of the progressive movement that they were seeking to champion. And there's no question that they saw an interlocking of socialism and labor rights and women's rights, et cetera, as being all part of a larger agenda. And the medium that they chose to address it in particular, was in the context of these letters of advice. Okay, now we're going to shift to transition to another set of another maven, or mavens, as the case may be. And we have a transition. So we're going to start with a couple who were part of the flood of immigrants who came from Eastern Europe, Jews, and who came to the United States by the name of Abraham and Rebecca Friedman. Russian Jewish immigrants. They arrived in the US in 1908 at Ellis Island and decided, rather than staying on the Lower East Side in New York, they would move to the Midwest. And so they settled in Sioux City, Iowa in 1910. This particular couple came as religiously observant and continued to be religiously observant in their new hometown and in America. Abraham professionally or occupation-wise, I don't know if one calls it a profession, started by peddling chickens. And then he moved on to opening a grocery store. And then he moved up and became part owner of a movie and vaudeville theater chain. He owned a chain actually of theaters in several states. So he became a man of means. He was a man of respect, in not just in the Jewish, but in the wider community of Sioux City. And Abraham and Rebecca first had two daughters named Helen, the first one Helen, the second one named Dorothy. And then in 1918, Rebecca gave birth to twins. So they were both born on the 4th of July, 1918. Now, there's a lot of things that are quite remarkable, significant, amazing about these twins, as you will discover. And some of them, some of you probably already know where we're going with this and who these twins were. So they were born on the 4th of July. And the first one was named, the one who was born 17 minutes before the other was named Esther Pauline Friedman. And her nickname growing up and even into adulthood was Epi. And she married a man by the name of Jules Lederer on July 2nd, 1938, 2 days before her 20th birthday. Her sister, also born on the 4th of July, obviously, and her name, she was named Pauline Esther Friedman. Very creative naming here on the part of the parents. And she grew up with the nickname of Popo. So these two girls were nicknamed Epi and Popo. And Popo got married, what do you know, on the same day as her sister. She married a gentleman by the name of Mort Phillips. Mort Phillips and Jules Lederer, in fact, at one point in time, actually worked together, and they actually served in the military together, purely by coincidence. However, what's not by coincidence is the fact that these twins were born on the same day. That's not a coincidence, but that they got married in a double wedding ceremony. Now, the reality is that they, while they were growing up, they often wore the same clothes. They certainly went to the same schools through high school, but then even went to the same college, the local college near their home in Sioux City, and had many of the same friends, shared many of the same activities and interests. And we'll see that their lives continued to mirror each other in some very interesting ways. So Epi, in 1955, decided that she was going to apply to the Chicago Sun-Times and become an advice columnist. And so she applied to be the person to replace the woman who is currently writing a column called Ask Ann Landers. Epi obviously won that contest. And so she assumed the authorship of that column, and she became known to the world as Ann Landers. By the year 1993, her column was appearing in 1,200 daily newspapers with 90 million readers all over the world, making her at that time the world's most widely syndicated columnist. And that column has since been translated, or was being translated, into more than 20 languages all over the world. So that's a little bit about just the beginnings for Epi Lederer, who then became Ann Landers. Well, guess what her sister did? Pauline Esther Popo Phillips, she started off by helping her sister answering some of the letters that were coming in to the Ask Ann Landers column. But the ownership and publishers, managers of the Chicago Sun-Times, for whatever reason, decided to forbid the partnership of the two women working together. So just around that time, Pauline and her husband moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, and having moved out there and having developed an interest in writing an advice column, Pauline contacted the editor of the San Francisco Chronicle, which was running an advice for the lovelorn column known as Molly Mayfield. And Pauline said, this is trash. I can do a much better job. let me give you some sample letters. So the editor gave her a bunch of letters that had come in to the Molly Mayfield column and said, okay, take these home, get back to me in about a week. Let me see what you got. And, if it's good, then maybe we can proceed. So Pauline took the letters home with her, wrote answers to every single one of them, and the next day brought it back to the editor and handed them over. And he looked at them and said, "You are hired." She decided to make up a name for herself. And so she adopted the name Abigail Van Buren, and the column came to be known the world over as Dear Abby. Now, where would she get a name like Abigail Van Buren? Now, Abigail, in fact, what she tells us in her, autobiographical works is that that comes from the Bible, and it was the name of one of King David's wives. And there's a quote in the text where David says to Abigail, Abigail, you're a woman of great counsel, C-O-U-N-S-E-L, or a woman of great advice. So Pauline liked that, and so she became Abigail. And as far as Van Buren, I'm sure very few of us know any other Van Burens other than the one who happened to be president of the United States, Martin Van Buren, and Pauline liked the sound of that name, so she took that as her official last name. So officially, her pen name was Abigail Van Buren, or shortened simply to Dear Abby. Now, we can see right away that both of these women who had grown up in Sioux City and were Jewish, and in fact were raised in an observant Jewish home. And in fact, their first language was Yiddish, because that's what their parents spoke. Their parents were immigrants who spoke Yiddish, and so that's what the girls spoke. And we have no doubt that part of their early learning and education came via reading the Yiddish Daily Forverts. And both of them have acknowledged that they were inspired by the Bintel Brief, the very column written by Abraham Kahan. So they took inspiration and they took a sense of direction and purpose from that, but they made it entirely their own. And certainly many more people in the world have heard of Ann Landers and Dear Abby than have ever heard of Abraham Kahan. They certainly established reputations all over the world. But it's also true that they had an intense rivalry between them, and one can only imagine. And there's a lot to be told, I think, about that story. Just as an aside, 2 years ago, Natalie Portman announced that she was going to be making a film about the two sisters. And not only was she planning to direct the film, she was planning to play both of the parts. Now, that was 2 years ago. I've looked online. I haven't heard or seen any updates on that. I don't know where that project stands at this point, but I can say that we should all be on the lookout for it. And if it does come about, I think it'll be a very interesting film to see. So that's a little bit about Abby. Here we have the two sisters together, Ann Landers, Abigail Van Buren. This picture, I think, was taken just shortly before their 40th birthdays. You can see an incredible identical resemblance, although one of them, and I forget which, actually had some plastic surgery done. So they now look a little bit different, at this time, they looked a little bit different than they had been before. So in 1958, just after both of them had started working, Life magazine, I'm sure many of you remember Life magazine as being one of the primary publications, periodicals of the day, certainly in the 1950s, came out with a sensationalist story informing the public about the sisters' intense rivalry in its April 1958 issue. And it talked about how they each tried to outdo the other, and they constantly looked at who had more newspapers running their columns. And certainly of the two rival syndicates that they worked for, there were contracts which made it very clear that under no terms whatsoever was a syndicate to try to run both of the sisters' columns in the same newspapers. That was absolutely verboten. And so they were in constant competition, and their newspapers and newspaper syndicates were in intense competition with each other as well. We don't have time to go into that, but that's a whole other story in and of itself. But let's get to the letters. Here's a letter by Mr. K to Ann Landers, and she was always addressed as Mrs. Landers, very formal. And I think we'll take a little bit of time for people to write in a few quick responses to this one. I've always regarded most marital mix-ups as very humorous, until now, that is, when the noose is tightening around my own neck. We've been married, my wife and I have been married 10 years and have 2 sons. I like auto racing, but my wife has no interest in it, so I've always gone without her. I've fallen for a woman with 3 children who is also very fond of auto racing. Her husband is impossible. This may sound corny, but I think she would be a wonderful companion for me. I suppose you think I'm a louse, but I am stumped. I would like to have your advice on this problem. Mr. K. So I'll give you just a minute or two to write responses. Again, you can write it as AL for Ann Landers, or ME if it's your own personal response. And we'll just take a little bit of time with this one. But this is, just one example, and the kinds of letters that people wrote to Abby and to Ann Landers were very, very similar. And the reality is that their kinds of responses, their styles of response, were not radically different from each other. They tended to be kind of snappy, kind of have practical wisdom to them, being very direct, and sometimes a bit pushy. So, Lori, do we have a couple of responses to read?
We have one from Robbie, but this is a PG presentation tonight, so I'm going to skip that one, Robbie.
Okay, okay. I'll talk to Robbie about that one later. Okay, yeah.
From Ed, we've got save your drive for your home life. Drive in air quotes. Let's see, Maureen says stay with your wife. It's not bad to have different interests in a relationship. Go, Maureen. From Randy, you're falling for a woman who shares your love of racing is just an excuse to abandon your marriage for reasons unrelated.
Okay, good.
Let's see.
All right.
I have one from AL now, so let's see what that one says.
Okay.
Mr. K, is auto racing the only thing in your life that is worth? Is auto racing the only thing in your life that is worth being married for? Wake up and learn.
All right, very nice, very good. Okay, so I clearly hear that we have a lot of potential out there for being mavens for advice columns. Here's the answer that Ann Landers gave. So she said, Dear Mr. K, time wounds all heals. That's a great line. Time wounds all heals, and you'll get yours. Do you realize that there are 5 children involved in your little racetrack romance? Don't be surprised if you wake up one of these days and wish you had your wife and sons back. You're flirting with a muddy track on Black Friday, and the way you're headed, you'll get exactly what you deserve. So both of these women really were very good with language. They were very quick, they were very sharp, and the reality is in their early years, they too answered virtually every letter by themselves. Over time, since they received such a flood of mail, that they had to engage and hire other people to help them out. Here's one, Dear Mrs. and we won't have time to write answers to all of these, so I'm just going to read this letter in and then the response. Dear Mrs. Landers, I've just graduated from grade school, okay? And the boy I like is in the Army. He has written that he will be home on leave soon, but my mother forbids me to see him. I tried to explain that we just want to see a movie and we'll be home early. Mother says I can't go and that I am too young to know what I am doing. Please help me. So again, we have, always have generational issues, children versus parents, and parents being more traditional and children wanting to kind of, break the bonds of the limits that their parents place on them. How does Ann Landers answer EV? Dear EV, if you just graduated from grade school, you're about 13 years old, chicken. Uncle Sam needs men, you don't. Listen to your mother, she's right. And about that boyfriend, his brains must be AWOL. So there's a real kind of sassiness to a lot of the responses that we find from both Ann and Abby. Dear Mrs. Landers, 2 months ago, I met a man who seems very fond of me. He has 2 jobs, which is the reason he's never called me up on the phone or taken me out. He's very busy. He says he cares for me a great deal, but I see him only once a day when he delivers food at my home. I don't want to rush into anything. What do you think? Steady reader. Dear SR, what this man is delivering to your home sounds like baloney. I have a sneaking suspicion that your backdoor Romeo has a wife and a family, plus several other very good, quote, customers. You'd better forget about him and suggest that he leave whatever it is he's delivering in a convenient place, okay? No contact. He ought to stick to his commission as the bonus for his sales. A couple of quickies here. Dear Abby, are birth control pills deductible? Only if they don't work. Dear Abby, I have always wanted to have my family history traced, but I can't afford to spend a lot of money on it. Do you have any suggestions? Yes, run for public office. About 4 months ago, the house across this, I love this one. Dear Abby, about 4 months ago, the house across the street was sold to a father and son, or so we thought. We later learned it was an older man about 50 and a young fellow about 24. This was a respectable neighborhood before this, quote, odd couple moved in. They have all sorts of strange looking company. Men who look like women, women who look like men, blacks, whites, Indians. Yesterday, I even saw 2 nuns go in there. Abby, these weirdos are wrecking our property values. How can we improve the quality of this once respectable neighborhood? And Abby says, you could move. So that was her response. Sharp, sappy, snappy, quick, and always very, very clever and shrewd in their responses. Okay, we're going to move to, since we have just a little bit of time, we're going to move to the next Maven, another woman known the world over, Dr. Ruth, Dr. Ruth K. Westheimer. Okay, a little bit of her background. She was born in 1928 in Frankfurt on Main. She was the only child of an Orthodox Jewish couple. She survived Kristallnacht at age 10. Her parents sent her to a Swiss orphanage via the Kinder transport, and I assume that most of you are familiar with that, a way to save and protect Jewish children. So they shipped her to Switzerland, and she was able to survive the war in that way. Later, she actually went to Palestine and to Israel. She served in the Haganah and learned to fire a Sten gun. So she was a sniper in those Jewish forces, the Haganah, and she talked very fondly about her time in that area. Later, she moved to Paris. She studied at the Sorbonne. She's been married several times. She was married 3 times, in fact, and she said it was the 3rd time that things really finally clicked. She came to the United States, to New York, and has lived on the Upper West Side or Riverdale, one of those neighborhoods, for her entire life, virtually, since coming to the U.S. She studied at Teachers College at Columbia and received her doctorate there in sex education and psychology. She started to work for Planned Parenthood and found that she really enjoyed the work in sex therapy and in psychology and in relationships and in counseling people and in being an educator. And so that's what she has made her career about, and that's what she is known the world over for. Clearly, Jewish values, Jewish sources, and Jewish texts and traditions have played a vital role in her life and in her work. Here we see 2 of her most famous quotes. It says in the Talmud, a lesson taught with humor is a lesson retained. She certainly was always very humorous in her presentations. She said, I came from an Orthodox Jewish home, so sex for us was never considered a sin. I'm going to actually pause this for just a moment and escape from this. And I want to just show you very, very quickly, if I can manage this, to stop sharing. And then I'm going to, let's see. Show you a brief section of a talk. This is a trailer for a film that is in production. I'm not sure if it's been released yet on Hulu about a movie called Ask Dr. Ruth.
This television program.
But we don't, Dr. Chervin, we don't quite see the video yet.
Okay, so I need to go back to share screen. Sorry, I will share my screen. Okay. Let's see if I can do this. Can you see that?
We're still seeing your PowerPoint, so you have to stop sharing that one and share the your internet browser.
All right, let's stop share this. All right. Let's see.
When you see the share screen button, there should be a button that says entire screen. Click that button.
I don't see that. No, I want to. All right. Well, I think we may have to do without it for this one, because I'm not. Let's see. I need to share my screen again.
You can share your PowerPoint if you want.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see. Back to here. Share screen. All right, I'm gonna let's try this. No, not working. Sorry. Okay, we practiced this all afternoon, but wasn't working for us.
Well,
It was working then, but I'm sorry it's not working now. Okay, so in any event, what I would like to be able to share with you. Can you see now?
We can see your PowerPoint
You see
screen.
my PowerPoint. Okay. All right. So I actually had a video, wonderful video of Dr. Ruth being interviewed, and actually a trailer for the Hulu documentary about her life, and I highly recommend that.
You can show the video now.
Oh my God.
Your screen allows video sharing now.
Yeah.
So if you pull up the video, it'll show up.
Okay. Now, will it show now?
Yes. Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. All right. Here's.
The host is Dr. Ruth K. Westheimer.
Hello?
You're not going to believe this woman. She has a deep German accent and she talks about sex. And I think we should do something with her.
In the early 80s, people did not talk about sexuality.
You have a certain list of words you can't say. Well, we said them.
And then let him insert his penis into the vagina from behind.
We didn't think it would explode like it did.
And then, of course, you got your own television shows.
Before I started to do television, the most important thing for me was education. While I was studying, I was a single mother. I got a position at Planned Parenthood, and I loved it. I never compromised, even when it was not popular.
I'm placing you under arrest.
Are there parts of your past that you don't like to talk about?
Of course,
She's had a lot of tragedies in her life.
having been raised with no family around, there was no place on earth for me.
She was a young child living in Frankfurt, Germany, when the Nazis came to power.
Because of my background as a German Jewish refugee, I had a sensitivity for the people who were regarded as subhuman.
Ruth started to shift awareness of HIV and AIDS.
There is no such thing as retiring for me. Hello? Say the word sex with more emotion. I have an obligation to live large and make a dent in this world. At 90, still talking about sex from morning till night.
So I don't know if that's available on Hulu yet, but it's certainly something to watch out for. And another media empire that she has created with I think something like 40 books and TV shows and radio. She had her own program on radio for 12 years, and counseling and educating, and certainly a major force, and certainly one who has used her Jewish background to good effect. A tiny woman, she stands 4'7", but she's a giant in terms of the influence that she has had on liberalizing attitudes and behavior when it comes to sex. We have just a minute or two left, and so I'm going to just switch to the final video so I don't have to switch back and forth. I have a final video that I think responds to some of the kinds of questions and concerns and issues that many of us actually have today. This is actually an Israeli giving advice to his mother about how to use Zoom.
האמא, כן, יש לי כמה דקות עכשיו. יש לך כבר זום שם למחשב? לא משנה, לא משנה. זה די פשוט. נתחיל מההתחלה. טוב, עכשיו כנסי לאתר ZOOM, זום. אני מחכה כל טוב, תהילה. תעשי להירשם בעזרת גוגל. תכניסי את הסיסמה של המייל. אני לא יודע מה הסיסמה של המייל שלך, זה ההתחלה. יכול להיות שאת על קפסלו, עכשיו תכניסי שוב את הסיסמה. יופי, עכשיו כנסי לזום, תקריבי את האפשרויות. New meeting, בכתוב. אין את רואה את עצמך. עכשיו תכנסי על Manage Participant. זה למטה. זה בסרגל שנפתח לך למטה. Manage Participant. מה האפשרויות שיש לך? Manage Participant. צריכה להזיז קצת העכבר. Manage Participant. כן, כן. Invite. תחפשי copy URL. מה האפשרויות שיש לך? אמא, יש שם copy URL. מתחת לזה, מתחת, כן. יש שם copy, אמא, יש שם copy, האותיות URL. יש שם, כל טוב, כל טוב. אני מתקשר אליי בוואטסאפ, תעני לי. אמא, תסובבי את המצלמה. אני רואה אותך, אני רוצה לראות את המסך. איך הגעת למסך הזה? תסגרי, תלחצי, copy URL. הנה, copy, את רואה בצד ימין. אפשר לשלוח גם במייל, אם נעמי אומרת שאת תהני מוואטסאפ ווב, אנחנו נעשה את זה. תרשמי בגוגל, וואטסאפ ווב. שימי את הפלאפון מול המסך שיצלם את הכל. לא, לא, ממש עם המצלמה. יש לך וואטסאפ ווב. עכשיו תחפשי אותי, שתכי לי את ה-URL. מי בפגישה? איפה את? אבל למה סגרת את הזום? לא נורא, תנסי שוב. New meeting, Manage Participant. Manage Participant. Manage Participant. Invite copy URL, תמזרי את הזום. לא, 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 אל תציג למסר, את מפס קטן שנמצא ליד ה-X. למה סגרת את הוואטסאפ? לא שמותר. כן, כן, אני רואה את הזמנה. תאשרי אותי. את צריכה לאשר אותי. Manage Participant. Manage, כן, על השם שלי, אדמית. אדמית, אדמית. אמא, יש שם אדמית. יש שם אדמית. לא מובן. זה אפשר להיות אותך. כן, אדמית, אדמית. היי!
הנה, איך אתה מתואר? היי, אתה רואה גם אותי? עכשיו תסביר לי איך אני משתפת את המסך, גם אם יראו את הזום וגם אם יראו את המצגת וישמעו אותי מסבירה. אפשר לעשות דבר כזה?
בואי נהנה ממה שיש, אחר משתף מסך. תעשי ליב מיטינג, ליב מיטינג, באדום למעלה, ליב! אני מצטער, אני מצטער, אני מצטער, אני מצטער, אני מצטער, אני מצטער.
So I think an issue that many of us can relate to. Anyway, I'm going to end with that, and certainly appreciate all of your input and responses. I know that we've tapped into a lot of Mavens out there in the audience, and I want to wish all of you well in the advice and expertise that you share with others, and the ways in which you continue to enlighten and amuse each other, and keep yourselves healthy and safe. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was so much fun. I've had so much fun tonight. Thank you, Dr. Chervin. I really know who to come to for advice on just about any topic. And by the way, some people wrote in that the video about Dr. Ruth is on Hulu and it's available now. So we can all look into that. I don't know if we'll have time for questions. I just want to remind alumni out there, please don't forget to update your information on our website and join the Gratz alumni Facebook page. We launched this series as a way of showing that we're here for our community during this challenging time. We are received to receive such strong response. Tonight, I see everybody is quickly jumping off, but I wanted to say that there's alumni and current students around Philadelphia and around the world. A number of people have been kind enough to donate to Gratz, and thank you, we appreciate that. If you would like to help strengthen Gratz and make it possible for more students across the world to participate in our programs, please consider making a tax-deductible charitable donation. On behalf of everyone at Gratz, I want to thank you for your participation and your support. If there were any questions, I don't know if there are any or not. I did quickly learn that you mentioned the forward, and the forward currently is online, and they are actually launching, one of our participants said that they are launching the Bintel Brief again online.
It's actually called Dear Abby's, and that's because it's written by two women named Abby. one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. And they're answering letters a lot about the pandemic, but all kinds of personal issues. So the Bintel Brief lives, and Dear Abby lives.
I would imagine that the questions are a lot different now than they were back then. I don't see any particular other questions going on recently. And it's getting late, so I don't think I'm going to look for any more. So a couple of people wrote, these letters sounded much funnier in Yiddish, I guess. I imagine they did. So I want to thank everyone for showing up tonight, for inviting Gratz into your living rooms and your dens and everywhere in your home. We really do appreciate that. And again, if you have questions for me or for anyone at Gratz, we're happy to answer. You can please get in touch with us through email or through our website. And also check into the Museum of American Jewish History, that Dr. Chervin is the director of docent training there. They have a lot of good virtual programs going on right now. So please do. Anything else?
That's it.
That's it. Okay.
That's it.
Good night, everyone.
Okay, good night. Thank you.